the human criminal into the pit of the Star Eater. The pit was a mile-deep gash of jagged obsidian basalt at the planet's core, pressurized, starved of natural light, and reeking of ozone and old blood. At the bottom lived the Veiltox, known across 3 quadrants as the Star Eater. It was not a beast of muscle and bone, but an apex thermodynamic anomaly, a silicon methane predator that absorbed ambient kinetic energy, radiated thermal cold, and had driven 12 distinct indigenous species to extinction just by breathing near their settlements. When the Galactic Tribunal sentenced Marcus to the pit, they didn't even bother with a firing squad. Executions were messy, and throwing a fragile, soft-tissued, hairless biped into the Star Eater was considered efficient waste disposal. The High Magistrate, a centipedine elder with iridescent chitin, clicked his mandible in smug dismissal as the heavy maglocks disengaged. "Let the void consume him," the magistrate hissed into the audio relay. "Within 3 minutes, his thermal signature will flatline, another useless death welder pollutant neutralized." The heavy titanium blast gates slammed shut, sealing Marcus in the pitch-black abyss. Down in the dark, Marcus landed on a carpet of crushed, frozen bones with a dull thud. He didn't scream. He didn't panic. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small, waterproof utility lighter, and clicked it. A tiny, steady flame sputtered to life, illuminating a space vast enough to swallow a cathedral. Marcus sighed, exhaling a plume of white condensation in the sub-zero air. He looked at the flickering orange light, then up into the suffocating, absolute blackness above. "No coffee, damp air, and the floor is full of trash," Marcus muttered to himself, his voice echoing flatly against the obsidian walls. Typical Tuesday. He wasn't a legendary mercenary, nor a genetically enhanced supersoldier. He was a long-haul survival specialist and persistence hunter from a high-gravity, hyper-volatile cradle world called Earth. To the galaxy, humans were terrifying anomaly survivors. To Marcus, the Star Eater wasn't an unkillable force of nature. It was just an ecosystem with a high metabolic requirement, and like any ecosystem, it had a flaw. For the first 24 hours, the Star Eater didn't even notice him. The creature, a colossal, shifting mass of interlocking crystal plates and freezing shadow, slumbered in the center of the pit, slowly drawing heat from the planetary core. Marcus used the time wisely. He didn't run. Running was for prey. Instead, he mapped the terrain using his lighter and a shard of flint. He noted the thermal vent leaks along the northern wall, the periodic pressure drops in the methane pockets, and, most importantly, the beast's breathing cycle. Inhale for 40 seconds. Compress kinetic output. Exhale for 20, radiating absolute zero. "Cold-blooded ambush predator," Marcus whispered, sitting cross-legged in a sheltered crevice while gnawing on a dry protein ration he'd managed to smuggle in his boot lining. Massive energy output during the strike, followed by a mandatory metabolic cooldown period. Classic design flaw. Mother Nature was lazy on this build. On day 2, Marcus began his hunt. He didn't use a blaster or a vibroblade. He used physics, stubbornness, and time, the 3 things humanity had weaponized since the Pleistocene. Using a length of copper wiring stripped from an old sensor beacon he'd salvaged from the bone pile, combined with compressed methane gas vented from a low-level fissure, Marcus constructed a slow-burn thermal trap. He didn't try to pierce the Star Eater's hyperdense crystal hide. That would be like trying to stab a diamond with a toothpick. Instead, he targeted the creature's breathing vents. When the Star Eater went into its synchronized metabolic cooldown on the morning of day 3, its massive, frost-rimed maw parted to vent excess internal pressure. Marcus moved. He didn't sprint. He was a persistence hunter. He didn't need speed. He needed endurance. He jogged steadily across the uneven floor, his boots crunching rhythmically against the frozen debris, closing the distance with terrifying, relentless consistency. The Star Eater's multifaceted sensory clusters snapped open, registering the vibration of his footsteps. A wave of bone-shattering kinetic cold washed outward, aiming to freeze the intruder into a brittle statue. Marcus sidestepped the wave, predicting the trajectory based on the creature's previous 3 cooling cycles. He leaped onto a projecting shelf of basalt, vaulted off a rib bone, and landed squarely on the beast's massive, frost-covered snout. The Starlit Eater shrieked, a sound like grinding tectonic plates, and thrashed violently, trying to shake the flea off its face. It accelerated its kinetic discharge, heating its outer plates to blinding, white-hot temperatures designed to vaporize organic tissue. A normal organism would have burned to ash in milliseconds. Marcus, wrapped in thermal reflective lining he'd fashioned from his flight jumpsuit, simply dug his heels into a natural fissure between the creature's primary optical plates, pulled out his modified methane charge, and jammed it directly into the beast's primary intake valve. He struck the igniter, patted the device affectionately, and leapt backward into a roll, dropping off the creature's snout just as the charge blew. It wasn't a massive explosion. It didn't kill the Star Eater. But it did something far worse. It introduced an unmanageable thermal imbalance directly into the creature's closed-loop cryogenic respiratory system. The Star Eater choked, swallowed a massive pocket of superheated gas, and violently seized, its internal cooling core violently rejecting the sudden spike. For the first time in 10,000 years, the apex predator of the pit experienced indigestion, disorientation, and absolute, paralyzing systemic shock. Marcus didn't wait for it to recover. He walked, not ran, walked up to the dazed, thrashing beast as it convulsed on the obsidian floor. 3 days in the dark. No sleep, no proper gear, just pure, spiteful human stubbornness. Using a heavy mining spike he had sharpened against the rocks into a makeshift chisel, Marcus went to work on the beast's vulnerable lower jawline, methodically carving away the hyperdense, diamond-hard serrated fangs that projected from its mouth. Up above, on the observation deck of the tribunal, the High Magistrate was sipping a cup of synthetic nectar when a junior officer choked on his drink. "High Magistrate," the officer gasped, staring wildly at the seismic monitors of the pit. "Sir, the thermal signatures, something is happening in the abyss." "Has the corpse finished decaying?" the magistrate asked lazily, not looking up. "No, sir, the Star Eater. It's sending distress pulses." The heavy maglock alarms suddenly wailed across the facility. The status light on the pit's blast gates shifted from a steady, secure crimson to a flashing, frantic yellow. Before the magistrate could issue an order, the 3-meter-thick, reinforced titanium blast gates didn't just open. They buckled outward with a deafening screech of stressed metal, rent apart from the inside by a hydraulic prybar improvised from a starship chassis. Silence fell over the observation deck. Through the billowing cloud of freezing vapor and ozone stepped Marcus. He looked like hell. His coveralls were charred, his face was streaked with black soot and alien blood, and he smelled faintly of sulfur and scorched methane. But draped over his broad shoulders, secured with rough-hewn straps of hide and wiring, was an immense, glistening collar of serrated, dagger-like crystal teeth the size of greatswords, ripping directly from the jaws of the undefeated Star Eater, which could now be heard whimpering in the dark behind him like a thoroughly defeated house pet. Marcus wiped a smear of soot off his forehead with the back of his hand, looked the terrified High Magistrate dead in the eyes, and spat a glob of grey phlegm onto the pristine white floor. "Your plumbing down there is a complete disaster," Marcus said smoothly, his voice gravelly and dripping with exhaustion. "And honestly, The local wildlife has terrible table manners. He adjusted the heavy, razor-sharp teeth on his shoulders, cracked his knuckles, and took a slow step toward the frozen, speechless councilmen. Now, Marcus smiled, a terrifying, humorless expression. Who's next in line to talk about my paperwork? The silence on the observation deck wasn't just quiet. It was the kind of absolute, vacuum-sealed quiet that occurs when a room full of immortal bureaucrats collectively forgets how to use their lungs. The High Magistrate's iridescent chitin rippled in a wave of unadulterated panic. His multifaceted eyes darted from the shredded 3-meter-thick titanium blast gates to the colossal, razor-sharp crystal teeth draped over Marcus's shoulders, and finally to the deep, echoing seismic sensors below, which were currently broadcasting the humiliating, low-frequency whimpers of a thoroughly broken Star Eater. "You," the magistrate choked out, his mandibles clicking so violently they nearly snapped. "You broke it. You didn't just survive the apex predator of the core worlds, you domesticated its dental work." Marcus didn't break stride. He stepped across the smoking threshold of the blast gate, his heavy-soled boots leaving a trail of ash and frost on the immaculate white deck plates. Each step sounded like a gavel falling in an empty courtroom. "Predator my ass," Marcus muttered, rolling his shoulders to adjust the heavy, jagged weight of the crystal collar. "Thing's got a metabolic efficiency rating of 12% and 0 conflict resolution skills. It's not an apex predator. It's a glorified space heater with an attitude problem." Two elite centipedine guards, their shock pikes humming with lethal voltage, instinctively stepped forward to block his path. Their bodies trembled so violently that the pikes buzzed out of tune. Marcus stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't reach for a weapon. He just stared at them with the cold, dead-eyed expression of a man who had spent 72 hours in a freezing, pitch-black pit, surviving on spite and cold protein rations. "Go ahead," Marcus whispered, his voice dangerously low. "Poke me with the sparky stick. See if I don't rip the rest of those teeth out and use them as patio furniture." The guards looked at each other, looked at the terrifying crystal trophy resting on the human's shoulders, and took 2 synchronized steps backward, pressing themselves flat against the bulkhead. Marcus grunted in mild approval and resumed his steady march toward the central command console, where the High Magistrate was currently trying to merge with the background wallpaper. He reached out, grabbed the magistrate by the shimmering fabric of his ceremonial robes with one grease-stained hand, and hoisted him off the floor until their eyes were level. "Now," Marcus said, his breath smelling faintly of scorched methane and sheer exhaustion, "we're going to have a little chat about my parole terms. Specifically, I want to know who filed the paperwork to throw a civilian maintenance contractor into a Class 10 hazard zone without a proper hazard pay rider." I didn't," the magistrate squeaked, his voice pitching into a panicked falsetto as his multi-jointed legs kicked uselessly in the air. "It was an automated clerical error, a bureaucratic oversight." "An oversight," Marcus repeated, his eyebrows arching dangerously. "Right. Well, I'm a big believer in administrative corrections, so here is what's going to happen." Marcus hoisted the magistrate a little higher, leaning in close. "You're going to open the facility hangar bay doors. You're going to requisition a fully fueled long-haul transport shuttle, and you're going to fill the cargo hold with 3 pallets of high-grade coffee, a decent mattress, and a case of proper cigars. After that, you're going to sign my discharge papers as service completed with honors." The magistrate nodded so fast his head became a blurry kaleidoscope of color. Yes, absolutely, anything you want. Just, please don't introduce me to your new pet downstairs." "Good choice," Marcus said, setting the magistrate down with a heavy, disdainful thud. He dusted off his hands, adjusted the Star Eater teeth on his shoulders, and turned toward the glowing exit corridor that led to the spaceport. "Oh, and one more thing," Marcus called back over his shoulder, not breaking his stride. "The magistrate coward, what? Tell your cleaning crew down in the pit to sweep up my lighter," Marcus said, flashing a grim, razor-thin smile. "I left it next to the bones. I'd hate to be docked for missing equipment." The transport shuttle's autopilot hummed a low, soothing tune as it cleared the upper atmosphere of Kryn Prime, banking hard toward the outer rim lanes. In the cargo hold, nestled securely between 3 pallets of imported Colombian roast coffee and a plush, memory foam mattress, sat Marcus. He had finally shed the tattered, soot-blackened coveralls, trading them for a clean, albeit slightly oversized, pilot's uniform he'd looted from the supply locker before takeoff. Propped up in the corner, like a pair of morbidly expensive golf clubs, was the colossal crystal collar made from the Star Eater's fangs, gleaming faintly under the harsh white cargo lights. Marcus struck a match against the sole of his boot, lit one of the high-grade cigars the High Magistrate had practically thrown at him, and took a long, luxurious drag. "Not a bad haul," he muttered to himself, exhaling a thick blue cloud toward the ventilation grate. "Beats a desk job." He reached out and tapped the ship's primary communication console to check the sector navigation map. As the glowing holographic projection materialized above the dash, a blinking red notification light pulsed quietly in the corner of the screen. It wasn't a distress call. It was a standard frequency broadcast from a nearby independent freight hub called Station 9 Delta, picking up local subspace chatter. Marcus leaned in, squinting at the scrolling text feed. "Urgent notice to independent contractors. Sector 4 maintenance grid reports severe, unhandled structural blockage in primary subterranean waste line. Previous contractor status, unaccounted for. Hazard pay bonus, 10,000 credits. Inquire at Station 9 Delta Central Dock." Marcus stared at the screen for a long, quiet moment. He took another slow drag of his cigar, tasting the rich, earthy smoke, and looked back at the obsidian crystal teeth resting in the corner. He thought about the quiet, predictable monotony of deep space. He thought about the endless, sterile corridors of bureaucratic outposts. And then he thought about the satisfying thwump of a heavy-duty magnetic clamp finding its mark, and the absolute panic of a galactic empire realizing it couldn't solve every problem by throwing money at it. A slow, crooked grin spread across Marcus's soot-stained face. He reached out, killed the autopilot link, and grabbed the flight stick, aggressively banking the shuttle hard to port. 10,000 credits, Marcus chuckled, tapping his ash into an empty coffee mug. "And here I thought I was retired." The transport ship roared into hyperspace, leaving the terrified capital worlds far behind as it hunted down its next plumbing emergency. Out in the deep black expanse of the outer rim, hyperspace exit Vector 9 Delta flashed with a sudden, silent burst of indigo light as Marcus's stolen transport shuttle dropped out of warp. Station 9 Delta was a sprawling, rust-pitted cylinder of welded durasteel that had seen better centuries. Clinging precariously to the edge of a dying gas giant, it looked less like an interstellar trade hub and more like a collection of shipping containers that had collided in the dark and decided to stay together. Marcus guided the shuttle smoothly into the automated docking bay, the landing clamps engaging with a satisfying, pneumatic clack. Before the boarding ramp had even finished hissing downward, a frantic voice crackled over the ship's external comspeaker. "Attention, incoming transport. Whoever you are, please tell me you're certified for high-pressure anaerobic sludge removal and carry your own liability insurance." Marcus hit the ramp control switch. The heavy steel plate lowered, bathing the bay's dim, flickering orange lights in a cloud of warm, cigar-scented exhaust. Standing at the edge of the platform was a harried-looking station master, a lanky, four-armed cephalopodic mechanic wearing a grease-stained jumpsuit and a headset dangling loosely from one ear. The station master stopped dead, staring up at the humans standing in the doorway. Marcus wasn't wearing his flight jacket anymore. He had thrown on his old, reliable grey overalls over a fresh t-shirt, a heavy utility belt clinking around his waist with every step. And slung casually over his right shoulder, resting against the heavy crystal collar of Star Eater fangs, was a brand-new, heavy-duty titanium pipe wrench. "Are you the new sanitation contractor?" the station master stammered, its multifaceted eyes darting nervously from Marcus to the terrifying collection of apex predator teeth. The dispatch log said a specialized survival engineer was inbound, but nobody mentioned, well, whatever that is. Marcus took a slow, deliberate step down the ramp, stepping onto the station's grated metal floor. He pulled a fresh cigar stub from his pocket, rolled it between his fingers, and offered the alien a reassuring, lopsided grin. "Don't sweat it, pal," Marcus said, his voice a smooth, gravelly rumble. "The teeth are just for stubborn gaskets." He tapped his utility belt, checking the seal on his spare canisters of expanding foam and magnetic clamps. The station master swallowed hard, all four of its hands twitching nervously before it hastily motioned for Marcus to follow. "Right this way, contractor," the cephalopodic mechanic squeaked, leading the way toward a heavy, pressure-sealed lift at the back of the bay. "The primary waste manifold is down on sub-level 12. To be honest with you, we didn't think anyone would take the job. The last 3 repair crews went down there and, well, let's just say their maintenance logs ended abruptly." Marcus stepped into the lift behind the station master, the heavy doors hissing shut with a damp, echoing thud. The car immediately began its rapid, stomach-dropping descent into the deep mechanical bowels of the station. "Let me guess," Marcus said, leaning casually against the scratched steel wall and adjusting the heavy pipe wrench on his belt. "Let me guess. Mysterious noises, flickering emergency lights, and a union grievance filed 3 years ago about something living in the sludge line." "Worse," the station master whispered, leaning in close as the lift indicator ticked past level 8. "It's a Gorgon-class sludge slug. A massive, hypercorrosive, multi-segmented bioorganism that crawled up from an abandoned deep space dumping chute 6 months ago. It eats industrial sealant, excretes a neurotoxic acid that melts durasteel, and completely refuses to respond to standard eviction notices." Marcus let out a slow, amused breath, blowing a puff of grey smoke toward the ceiling. "A slug," Marcus repeated flatly. "You called me out here across half a quadrant to deal with a glorified snail." "It's the size of a freight train, human," the station master protested, its skin flushing a bright, defensive shade of violet. "It took out the station's secondary life support grid yesterday. If it hits the main plasma conduits on level 15, we're all going to be vented into the void." The lift came to a sudden, jarring halt. The digital floor indicator blinked a harsh, angry red, sub-level 12 Sector 0. The heavy metal doors groaned open, flooding the elevator car with the thick, suffocating stench of sulfur, rotting organic waste, and superheated ozone. The corridor ahead was pitch black, save for the erratic, strobe-like flicker of an overhead emergency light casting long, trembling shadows across rusted pipes and dripping slime. "This is as far as I go," the station master said quickly, pressing itself flat against the back of the lift cab. 10,000 credits is in your escrow account. Just, please don't die. The paperwork for filling a vacancy is an absolute nightmare." Marcus grinned, stepping past the trembling alien and out onto the wet, vibrating deck plates. He unclipped his heavy-duty magnetic flashlight from his belt, flicked it on, and swept the piercing white beam down the dark, echoing tunnel. "Don't worry, pal," Marcus called back over his shoulder, the heavy titanium wrench clicking against his thigh with every steady, purposeful step. "I always clear my pipes, and unlike your last crew, this snail is about to learn what a real eviction looks like." The lift doors sealed shut behind him, leaving Marcus alone in the humming dark, marching straight toward the belly of the beast. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more incredible stories. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.